Welcome back to Andersen Acres. We're in the kitchen again today, and today we are going to be making herb and cheese pretzels. These are a flavorful, soft pretzel that are perfect to serve with a soup or a salad, or they're just delicious all on their own. So let's get started. Our first ingredient is going to be 1 cup of water, and yes, we are using the bread maker. We're using the bread maker because all we need to do is make the dough. Then we have to shape things by hand. So you will use your dough setting on your bread maker. Alternatively, you can use a mixer or even make the dough entirely by hand. It's up to you. As long as you do the mixing, the kneading, and allow for that first rise, you'll be fine. So our second ingredient is going to be 2 tablespoons of butter. Yes, you can use margarine instead. There's so many herbs in this particular bread dough, this particular pretzel, that you won't notice the difference. So yes, it's fine. You want 1 teaspoon of salt. I'm just using a regular table salt, but you can use a Himalayan or a sea salt or whatever you have. 1 tablespoon of sugar. Yes, we use sugar in our breads here. It's only a very little bit of sugar, so when you divide it up amongst the 12 pretzels we're going to make, the amount of sugar in each pretzel is very small. So we are going to want a big heaping big heaping tablespoon of Italian seasoning. That's going to be the entirety of the herbs for our particular dough. So I make my own Italian seasoning. You can make your own seasoning or you can just buy it. It doesn't matter as long as you have an Italian seasoning. We also want 2 tablespoons of Parmesan cheese. We want about half a cup of any shredded cheese you like. A good cheddar works. I'm using a farmer's cheese. Whatever you like will work just fine in this recipe. Okay, just fine, doesn't matter. We want about 3 cups of flour. I'm using all-purpose. You would use your bread flour or whatever you normally use to make bread dough, but I'm using all-purpose. And then finally you need 1 heaping teaspoon of yeast. I'm using bread machine yeast because I am using my bread machine to do this, but you of course can use whatever yeast you would use normally. So if you're making it by hand, you might do traditional or quick rise, it's fine. So I'm going to pop this in my bread maker and I'm going to let the bread maker do the mixing, the kneading, and allow for that first rise. That takes about 90 minutes in my bread maker. Might be different in your bread maker. If you're doing it by hand, well, you've probably done it by hand before, so you just allow it to rise as long as you would normally let a bread dough rise in your temperature and humidity in your kitchen. So we will come back as soon as we have a workable dough. All right, so our dough is ready. It has been rising for about an hour, which is normal. So what we're going to do is we're going to divide our dough into 12 roughly equal pieces. Don't have to be perfect, as they're turning into pretzels. So after we have them divided into 4, I like to rip them into 3 each. And that one's obviously way too big. And then just make them into little balls. Okay, you're going to do that with all 12 pieces. So again, you take your quarter, rip it into 3, and make balls out of each of them. Okay. Let's finish doing that. Oops. There we go. 1. 1. Okay. There we go. So the dough smells great because it's full of herbs. So it smells delicious. And good enough. There we go. Now we're going to take our rolls and we're going to form them into pretzels. We're going to do this by making a rope. Okay, so I'm doing 12 smaller sized pretzels. You can do 8 or even 6 larger size with the same amount of dough. Okay, but I'm only doing 12. And I'm making them a little bit smaller because they're going to go with a meal. But obviously, if you want them as a standalone snack, maybe you want them bigger. So how long do you want your rope? Well, I like to make mine about 1 foot long. Okay? roll up my sleeve. I like to make mine about a foot long, so that's about 12 inches. So, yeah, that's about good. Actually, it's actually longer than that. This is about 18 inches, but that's still good. So now you're going to take your rope, kind of let it relax into itself, which will make it shorter, so that'll pull it back to about 12 inches. Then we're going to, so again, you can make them longer if you like. There we go. So then what you do is you take your pretzel, form a U, cross the middle, and then bring this down. Now you can cross twice if you want, so cross a second time and then bring this down. But you see the size of the pretzels I'm making? That's about the size you get if you're doing 12. Okay, so set that aside. And we're just going to do that with all of them. So again, if you want a larger pretzel, just make fewer. So we're going to do that with all 12. And when you have your crisscross, kind of give it a push so it sticks a little bit. But otherwise, just let them relax. They're fine. So again, if you make it a longer rope, so I'll just show you. If you make it a longer rope, you can kind of sort of make a bigger pretzel, but it doesn't give you any more bread. Okay, so you can cross it either once or twice. That's up to you. I am not going to make you watch them all. I'm going to form my 12 pretzels, and then I will come back and explain the next set. So form your pretzels, then we'll talk. All right, there are formed pretzels. So you just want to make sure all the little edges are poked down, just so they don't pop up. And then you're going to set this aside to rise for about 10 minutes. During that 10-minute time frame, what we're going to do is we're going to get a pot of water and boil it on the stove. It needs to be big enough to at least put one in at once. If it's bigger and you can put more than one, excellent. But at least you need to be able to fit one of your pretzels in your pot. So get that pot of water on the stove, start it boiling. When it's boiled, and these have sat for about 10 minutes, when the water's boiling and these are sat, we will come back and I'll show you what to do next. All right, we have our water boiling nicely. So what we want to do now is we want to take some baking soda, not baking powder, and we want to just put some baking soda in that water. How much? Go slowly, it bubbles. You want about 1 tablespoon per cup of water that you have. That'll give you a good ratio. There we go. Let that dissolve. Okay? Let that dissolve. Get yourself a slotted spoon or another way to scoop your pretzels out of the water. So let that return to a boil. It'll only take a minute. And once it's returned to a boil, we're going to boil our pretzels. So we're going to boil our pretzels between 1 and 2 minutes total for each pretzel. Okay, so I'm going to dump my pretzels in. I'm going to do 2 at a time. About 30 seconds to a minute per side. Make sure they get well dunked in that water. And they will puff up a little bit. And you're going to do that with all 12 pretzels. They won't be quite ready to go in the oven yet. We have one more step before we can bake them. But once you have boiled your pretzels for 30 seconds to a minute per side, no more than 2 minutes total boiling time. The longer you boil them, the darker they will be. We will remove them from the water, return them to the pan, and then we'll come back. I'm not going to make you watch me boil all of them, so we'll come back when they are completely boiled. That's what a boiled pretzel looks like. We'll come back when I've got them all boiled and ready to go. And in the meantime, there's no point in you watching me boil 12 pretzels. It's really boring and kind of annoying. So we'll come back when these have all been boiled. All right, so our bagels are boiled. Now before we can bake them, we're going to preheat our oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. We're going to take an egg, take a basting brush, and smash that egg up with your basting brush. Let's give it a smash. There we go. Now you're just going to take that egg and you're just going to lightly baste your pretzels. Remember, 375 degrees we're preheating the oven to. It's important that we not be below that. You can go up to 400 if you like, but 375 is plenty high enough. There we go. So you want a decent coating of egg on there. You don't want to be like super gloppy and end up with egg everywhere. But a decent coating is fine. There we go. Okay. Now that we've got our egg on here, we want to do our topping. Our topping is fairly simple. We're going to take just some grated cheese. You probably only need about a quarter to a half a cup because you're only going to put a little bit of grated cheese on each one. You're not going to get crazy. You can do a little more, but remember the cheese melts and spreads, so it's going to end up everywhere. There we go. So don't get crazy, and you don't have to do this type of cheese if you don't want to. So I'm using a farmer's cheese, and that's going to be too much on some of these. So I'm using a farmer's cheese. You could use a mozzarella, you could use a cheddar, you could use a Colby. It's entirely up to you what kind of cheese you would like on your pretzels. That's what these are. They're pretzels. So remember, don't get carried away with the cheese because it is going to go everywhere when it melts. So you don't want too much because what will happen is it'll just make a mess. So careful with the cheese. There we go. Now we're going to take some Parmesan. And I'm just using the powdered stuff because it's fine. It's exactly the same as the grated stuff. It's just powdered instead of grated. So we're just going to sprinkle some Parmesan on there. Be generous with the Parmesan. It doesn't get as crazy as the other cheeses because it doesn't melt the same. So Parmesan. And then we're going to get some parsley. Just a little bit of parsley, and just do just a very little bit of parsley on top of each one. A little more. There we go. Now we're going to pop these in the oven to bake at about 375 degrees Fahrenheit, and we're going to let them bake for 20 to 25 minutes, or until we're happy with how dark they are. So we'll come back and look at the finished product. And there we go. Perfectly delicious herb cheese pretzels. They are fantastic on their own or as part of a meal. So thanks for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed making herb and cheese pretzels. They are, of course, deliciously perfect. If you'd like to see more of our videos, please like and subscribe so that we can keep baking for you. We'll see you tomorrow.